This is an excerpt from a short story I wrote called A Life in Music. My name is Jenga. I was born in a pine cone on the tallest Sitka spruce, raised by a forest at the edge of the Bering Sea. Felled at 580, you might think all those years would blur together, but I remember what went into creating every ring, each hard freeze, spring thaw, drought, windstorm, lightning strike, all the fires. Every rumor of war and revolution settled into my permanent record. I absorbed traces of every animal that ever called me home or fed off me. I recall every beetle larva, eagle's nest, and every grizzly that ever scratched its back on my bark. And somewhere in those 580 years, a soul crystallized into perfection. It took careful cutting and handiwork to release it, for that lucky day at the sawmill was where my life truly began. The journey from forest to sawmill started with separating me from my roots. I was familiar with men and saws, and I'd wondered if someday they would come for me. I knew that after I crashed to the ground, all my branches would be stripped, followed by immersion into the sea. I had long desired to feel the embrace of those rippling, frigid waves. I sensed there would be more for me beyond our little family forest. I could smell it. And with that first splash, I tasted it. Salt. My brain eagerly soaked up the seasoning. I intuited that it would serve me well wherever this journey took me. All the harvested trees were lashed together into one huge raft and hauled down the coast. I did not yet know I was bound for a mill. At that point, I even imagined that I might metamorphose into one of those orcas gliding alongside. But it was not meant to be. For while I did manage to break away, my family and the orcas left me behind. I became what they call a sinker. For 96 years, I rested at the bottom of Norton Sound. When I was thoroughly permeated with the salt of the sea, a once-in-a-100-year storm lifted me to shore. Scooped out of the shallows with a forklift payloader and set out to dry, I wondered what could be next. My soul had been sawed, stripped, soaked, and salvaged. Something greater awaited me, I was sure of it. In fact, during my entire time in the salty silt, as I became the barnacled host of several generations of king crabs, I never once doubted this undefined destiny. And as my salinated soul steamed and smiled in the sun, I tightened and toned every sliver of my being, ever ready. In short order, the same payloader deposited me onto a log deck, and I awaited my turn to enter the carriage. I saw the trees that had come before were now cut and divided into many symmetrical lengths. There was another tree ahead, pushed forward into a magnificent spinning circle, which sheared off slabs from four sides, exposing her rings and creating mounds of tree dust. When the spinning circle slowed to a stop, I saw that it was a circular disc wielding many sharp teeth. A man sharpened those teeth with a file. I welcomed him, not as executioner, but as surgeon. I desired the paring away of imperfection, for my initial edges to be plumb and smooth. I needed to bare my soul to the world. I leaned into the quarter-inch kerf and did not flinch. The man, a saw man, was pleased. He set me aside into a special stack. The salty sea had done what 580 years in the forest could not. Turned my body blue, lavender, yellow, and burgundy. What's more, my grain now displayed what they call silk, little cross-grained windows of strength to ensure no undue torquing would take place. Why this mattered and for what purpose I was intended I still wasn't sure, but the sawman remarked, "If there ever was a Sitka spruce made of melted star sapphires, why that Sitka spruce would be you." As I lay resting from my berth in a wooden storage shed, I attempted conversation with some of the other freshly cut wood, but no one answered. They were without souls, and as inanimate as the gray-weathered walls of the shed. The next day, a kind-eyed man came and took me away. He trembled as he touched me, and his hand went straight to the place where my soul was hidden, as if it were a plainly visible knot-hole. Every sliver aligned towards this man, like iron filings to a magnet. I was loaded into a truck and taken to his workshop. The sign on the street said, "Luther Jenga, guitar maker." Guitars everywhere, some being assembled, some repaired, different shapes and configurations, some boxy and hollow, some simply solid like a shark fin. One of the solid ones called out to me. He said his name was Plank. He asked me my name, and not knowing what else to say, I replied, "Jenga." Plank and the others laughed. "We're all Jengas," he said. Luther went to work on me that very day. I was quartered, sanded, fitted, and matched. Looking around, I could see what was in store. I would become a celebrated Jenga dreadnought. Over the next several weeks, I was conjoined with exotic companions. A one-piece mahogany neck from the West Indies was attached to rosewood back and sides from the rainforests of Brazil. My bracing was carefully sculpted and scalloped to maximize sound without compromising strength. Around the exclamatory mouth of my sound hole, Luther inlaid marquetry of minute multicolored wood chips, giving tender attention to detail. This was followed by a molding of herringbone purfling wherever it could be squeezed in around each edge of my body. Varnish lovingly layered over a period of several days and allowed to dry, sealing my salty soul in a paper-thin, protective, transparent shell. Frets were attached in space at precisely expanding mathematic intervals up the length of an ebony fingerboard, liberally inlaid with abalone shell. Finally, the ball ends of the brightest bronze strings money could buy were threaded over a bone saddle into an ebony bridge and then secured with whalebone pins. Up top, loose ends of the string wound around gold-plated tuners beneath a scroll-work headstock so elaborate it might have once served as a figurehead tucked under the bowsprit of a clipper. I could feel a delicious tightening, my neck bowing into a delicate arc, strings floating off the fingerboard to where they were neither too high nor low, then all six stretched and tuned to a harmonically perfect turn. The first chord to ever emerge from me was a strummed G. It shattered the silence of the workshop like a small cannon firing shards of crystal into a harp. All through the night Luther wept as he sang songs from the old country, a place called Czechoslovakia. He couldn't put me down, and I didn't want him to. And then the sun came up, and he hung me on the most prominent peg in the workshop. He said that I was the greatest of all his guitars. He said, "You are the Jenga." This pronouncement, along with weeks of exclusive attention he'd given to my construction, caused Plank and the other guitarists to somewhat resent me. But I didn't care. I was Jenga. This story also has a companion song by the same name.